And of course, Russo likes to say he created The Rock or he created Steve Austin. Let me just get this out of the way now. Sitting with Russo in the room. No, seriously, just so we understand it, it was like watching an idiot savant just rattle off shit.
He was unbearable. That word gets thrown around in wrestling all the time. But when it comes to Jim Cornette, one of the sharpest and most respected minds in the history of professional wrestling, that word means something very specific. It means somebody broke his rules. It means somebody treated the business he loves like a joke. Jim Cornette was born on the 17th of September, 1961 in Louisville, Kentucky. He spent decades earning a reputation as one of the greatest managers the sport has ever seen. He studied this business from the inside out, from his early days as a photographer and magazine writer in Memphis in the early 1980s, all the way through legendary stints managing the Midnight Express, building Smoky Mountain Wrestling from the ground up, working inside WWE, and running Ohio Valley Wrestling as head booker and trainer. He is not a man who stumbled into wrestling opinions. He earned them with years of hard work and deep knowledge. If you love these wild wrestling stories, hit the hype feature and give hype to this video right now so more people can hear about this. Jim Cornette knows this business better than most people alive. His core belief is simple. Wrestling only works when it feels real. Not fake real, not cartoon real. Real real. The kind of real where you believe a man is fighting for something, where the stakes feel true, where the story being told in that ring connects with something deep inside your gut. He calls it believable athletic competition. He believes in storytelling. He believes in psychology. He believes in emotional realism. Every match, in his view, is a story being told to human beings who need to feel something genuine before they will invest. That is not a crazy belief. That is actually a very thoughtful belief. And for a long time, when he was working inside the system, it produced some of the best wrestling television and live events this country ever saw. But here is where things started to go wrong. Not with wrestling, with Jim Cornette himself, because somewhere along the way, his passion for protecting the craft stopped being a private crusade and became a very public, very loud, very relentless war. And wars have casualties. Sometimes the person firing the loudest shots is so busy attacking everyone in sight that they stop being part of the solution and become part of the problem. That is the Jim Cornette story. Not the manager, not the booker, not the historian. The version of Jim Cornette who built a second career out of telling people what they are doing wrong, what they have already done wrong, and what they will never be allowed to do right in his eyes. The version who turned disagreements into lifelong grudges, professional critiques into personal attacks, and a genuine love of wrestling into a one-man campaign that sometimes hurt the very sport he was trying to protect. Before we get into the names, it is worth understanding exactly what Cornette believes these people did wrong. In his view, each one of them committed a specific crime against professional wrestling. Not a legal crime, a professional one. They either mocked the craft, destroyed it from within, endangered the people around them, or simply refused to respect the idea that wrestling should make people believe something real is happening. That is the measuring stick. That is the bar. And in Jim Cornette's world, if you fail to clear it, you are not just a bad wrestler. You are an enemy of the business itself. That framing matters because it tells you a lot about why Cornette's commentary, for all its passion and historical knowledge, sometimes tips into something that feels less like criticism and more like a personal crusade with no off switch. Before we move forward, it is worth spending a little more time on what made Jim Cornette so respected in the first place. Because to understand why people still argue about him, you need to understand what he actually built. When he came up in the Memphis territory in the early 1980s, he was not a wrestler. He was a fan who turned himself into a professional through sheer obsession. He started by taking photographs at shows. Then he started writing for wrestling magazines. Then he started announcing. And then, through a combination of quick thinking, sharp instincts, and a mouth that could cut through noise like a blade, he became a manager. Not just any manager, one of the greatest who ever lived. He stood ringside with the Midnight Express, and he helped make them feel like genuine threats every single time they stepped out from behind that curtain. He did not just wave a tennis racket. He talked and he sold, and he made you feel the danger. That is a genuine skill. That is craft. That is the thing Cornette fights to protect, because he learned it the hard way, night after night, in front of real crowds who had to be convinced, or they simply would not react. He took that same intensity to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the promotion he founded and ran. Smoky Mountain was old-school wrestling done properly. Good guys and bad guys you could understand. Stories told over months. Crowds who were invested in real emotional stakes. When he went into WWE, he brought that same discipline to the training ground at OVW, where he helped develop some of the most successful performers in the company's history. His track record is not empty. It is impressive, and that is what makes the later chapters of his story so difficult to watch. The list you are about to hear is famous in wrestling circles. 10 names. 10 people. Jim Cornette has publicly stated he will never work with again. Each name represents a different moment where something snapped, where a disagreement became a declaration of war, and where Cornette made it very clear that in his world, there is no second chance. Some of the stories behind these names are genuinely shocking. Some are funny, some are a little scary, and some will make you ask the very simple question: when does passion become obsession? When does protecting your beliefs start doing more harm than good? There is a deeper question worth asking before we go any further, and it is one that wrestling fans rarely stop to consider. What does it actually mean to protect a business? Jim Cornette would say it means holding the line on standards. It means refusing to allow the craft to be diluted by performers who do not respect it, bookers who do not understand it, and executives who treat it like a toy rather than a tradition. And by that definition, he has been protecting wrestling his entire adult life. He has never stopped. He has never softened. He has never looked at the changing landscape and decided to adapt his message to fit the new audience. That kind of stubbornness can be admirable. It can also be a cage, because the wrestling business has always changed. It changed when television came along. It changed when pay-per-view changed the financial model. It changed when the internet gave every fan a voice and every performer a platform. It will keep changing long after Jim Cornette has stopped commenting on it. The question is not whether wrestling changes. The question is which changes serve the audience and which ones abandon them. Cornette has a very specific answer to that question, and for a long time, his answer was useful. Now it sometimes sounds like a man reading from a script he wrote 30 years ago and refusing to look up from the page. The list of 10 names is also a kind of autobiography. Every person on it represents a moment in Cornette's life when he felt something he cared about deeply was being attacked, dismissed, or destroyed. Omega and the Young Bucks represent the AEW era, the moment when a genuine alternative to WWE emerged and thrived by doing almost everything Cornette despises. Russo represents the WWE Attitude Era, the period when Cornette was inside the machine and watching decisions being made that he believed were destroying everything the business had built. Lesnar represents OVW, the training ground where Cornette invested himself completely and where he felt the people around him did not always share his commitment. Morella represents the moment when Cornette's authority was taken away from him and he lost his position at OVW. Ryan and Janela represent the indie scene, the world that grew up outside the mainstream and built a culture that Cornette views as fundamentally incompatible with professional wrestling. Owens represents developmental, the system where Cornette was supposed to shape the future of the business and found himself dealing with performers whose temperament he found exhausting. Cassidy represents what Cornette sees as the final insult, a gimmick that openly mocks the effort and seriousness that wrestling is supposed to demand. And Callahan represents something Cornette has always cared about deeply, the safety of the performers, the basic duty of care that exists in any physical profession. When you lay it out like that, the list stops being just a collection of grudges. It becomes a map of a man's career, marked at every point where he felt the business betrayed what he believed it should be. The Young Bucks situation is a good example of how complicated this gets. When Cornette praised their match with FTR, he was not being inconsistent. He was actually being completely consistent with his own philosophy. He liked that match because it told a story in the way he believes stories should be told. It had structure and logic and emotional payoff. So the question becomes, why can he not extend that same acknowledgement to the other things the Bucks do? Why does the praise for one match not soften the condemnation of everything else? The answer is that for Cornette, it is not just about whether a match works on a given night. It is about what kind of wrestling you are promoting, what you are teaching the audience to expect, and what legacy you are building for the business. In his view, even if the Bucks have one great traditional match, the overall project they represent is harmful because every time they do their usual style, they are training the audience to accept something he considers fake wrestling. That is actually a coherent argument. You can disagree with it completely, but it is internally consistent. The trouble is that Cornette does not make that argument calmly and analytically. He makes it with fury and personal insults that make it impossible for the people he is criticizing to engage with the substance of what he is saying. If you call someone an entitled little smarmy-faced from Cucamonga, they are not going to sit down and thoughtfully consider your concerns about long-term booking philosophy. Cornette created that dynamic, and somewhere along the way, getting attention became part of the point. On the subject of Sami Callihan, the baseball bat incident highlighted something genuine and important about safety culture in wrestling. Physical injury is a real risk in this profession. The difference between a worked spot and a real accident can sometimes be a matter of inches and timing. When something goes wrong, the response from the people involved matters enormously, both for the well-being of the person who was hurt and for the culture of the locker room going forward. Callihan's dismissal of the backlash, his framing of concern about his colleague's injury as an overreaction, is worth criticizing. On that specific point, Cornette was not wrong to be angry. Eddie Edwards is his friend, and Edwards was genuinely hurt. Where Cornette overreaches is in the leap from "this performer was reckless and dismissive" to "this is what an entire generation believes." One person's bad attitude after an incident does not define a generation, but Cornette made that leap without hesitation, because that is the pattern. Every individual failing becomes evidence of a systemic collapse. Every single bad actor becomes a symbol of everything wrong with modern wrestling. With Brock Lesnar, there is also a layer worth examining, because Lesnar went on to become one of the most successful performers in the history of both WWE and UFC. He held championships at the highest level in two of the most demanding environments in the world. The lack of passion criticism does not quite fit with a career that spanned decades at the very top of the industry. People can be introverted and still be excellent at their jobs. People can be difficult in a locker room and still perform at a world-class level when the lights come on. Cornette's view of Lesnar was formed during a developmental period when Lesnar was young, new to the business, and presumably still figuring out who he was as a performer. Judging someone's entire career by their developmental period is not always fair. But Cornette does it with Lesnar the same way he does it with Owens. Once you are on the list, the verdict is permanent. The evidence is fixed at the moment of judgment. Nothing that happens after changes it. Let us start with where the war got loudest, most recently and most publicly. In 2022, Kenny Omega fought back. Omega is the AEW co-EVP, the former IWGP heavyweight champion, and widely considered one of the finest in-ring performers of his entire generation. Cornette had been attacking him for years at that point. Years of podcasts, of YouTube rants, of publicly dismissing everything about him. And in 2022, Omega had had enough. He called Cornette's followers extremely pathetic human beings. He dismissed Cornette not as a wrestling expert, but as a media persona built entirely on outrage. He basically said the whole thing was a performance, an act, a way to generate clicks and views by being permanently angry about modern wrestling. That hit differently, because whether you agree with Omega or not, it raised a question that has never really gone away. Is Jim Cornette a genuine guardian of the craft? Or is he a man who discovered that being furious on the internet pays better than being constructive? The feud between these two men has never been resolved. Both remain publicly hostile to each other to this day. So what started all of this? The feud between Cornette and Omega goes back to Omega's years working in Japan, where he did comedy wrestling. Not just mild comedy, full-on absurdist entertainment that included a competitive match against a 9-year-old girl and segments involving a blow-up doll. To most people watching, this was Omega being creative, funny, and willing to entertain in a completely different cultural context. To Jim Cornette, it was an unforgivable disgrace. he declared that Omega disgusted him. He said Omega does not deserve to be rewarded for his indiscretions by being called a professional wrestler. He labeled Omega's entire style video game wrestling, meaning moves and sequences that look impressive in a game but have no connection to believable athletic competition. Cornette said, and here we are giving you the quote as he gave it. His work was because he looked self-trained, and I told him to go to a quality training facility. He also said he's a joke wannabe play wrestler that wrestled small children and inanimate objects in competitive matches in front of people. He thinks wrestling is a joke because that's the way he takes it in his muddled up mind. And in a third attack, he described Omega as a flying ballet dancer that is imitating wrestling moves that he's seen people do in a flying wrestling ring or on a video game. These are not mild critiques. This is somebody who has genuinely built hatred for a person over style differences. And that is where Cornette starts to lose people. Kenny Omega is one of the most decorated and respected performers in the world. But in Cornette's world, the comedy matches in Japan cancel everything else out. That is not criticism. That is a grudge. Number 2 on this list is the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, AEW co-EVPs and tag team icons who helped pioneer the Super Kick Party style and who co-founded All Elite Wrestling alongside Tony Khan. In the wrestling world, they are genuinely significant figures. People who changed tag team wrestling. People who built a loyal fan base from nothing on the independent circuit. But to Jim Cornette, the Young Bucks are the living, breathing symbol of everything wrong with modern wrestling. His criticism goes beyond their in-ring work. He sees them as entitled performers who have used executive power they never earned through traditional routes to push a style of wrestling he considers self-parody. He has called them entitled little smarmy-faced PS from Cucamonga, who are trying to swoop in and steal something from others who worked harder for what they had. He views their booking style as self-indulgent, their aesthetic as cosplay rather than professional wrestling, and their use of creative control as a weapon against the principles of good storytelling. Here is the interesting part, and it is worth noting because it actually undercuts Cornette's own argument. When the Young Bucks worked a match in AEW against FTR, done in a traditional old-school style, Cornette praised it. He said it was great and called it the best tag team match in AEW history. He said it was almost like they said, okay, FTR, let's do our thing where we can work like FTR. So, Cornette himself admitted the Bucks can work properly when they choose to, which raises the obvious question. If they have the ability, is the problem really the Bucks? Or is it that Cornette wants everyone to wrestle the same way forever, with no room for creativity or evolution? Number 3 is Vince Russo. This one is different because it is not purely about wrestling style. It is personal. Russo is the former head writer for WWE, WCW, and TNA, infamous for inventing what became known as Crash TV booking. Rapid changes, swerves at every turn, title changes every week, disqualification finishes stacked one on top of the other, angles designed purely for shock value rather than long-term storytelling. Cornette blames Russo more than almost any other single individual for the collapse of WCW. In his view, Russo destroyed audience trust with chaotic, incoherent booking that made professional wrestling look stupid and unpredictable in the worst possible way. Their feud began backstage in WWE when Cornette confronted Russo over booking 6 or 7 DQ finishes in a single 2-hour episode of Raw, including a last-minute change to Chyna's match that Cornette saw as completely indefensible. Russo went to Vince McMahon to complain about Cornette. Cornette never forgave him. By 2017, after Cornette had spent a long time verbally attacking Russo and publicly challenging him to a physical confrontation with cash on the line, Russo took legal action and filed a restraining order. Most people would have let that be the end of it. Not Jim Cornette. He made copies of the restraining order, signed each one personally, and sold them at autograph conventions for 8 notes each, with half the proceeds going to charity. That is actually quite funny. It is also the behavior of a man who cannot stop fighting even when the law tells him to. Russo has publicly said he views Cornette as a goof and claims not to have personal issues with him. Cornette has dismissed that entirely. As he put it, Russo trending on Twitter is not something I ever thought I'd see. But every time his name comes up, it's because somebody is defending the indefensible, and that's his track record in professional wrestling. The Russo situation deserves a little more attention because it captures something specific about how Cornette's wars work. When Russo was booking WWE in the late 1990s, the company was in the middle of its most commercially successful period. Cornette would say that success happened in spite of Russo, not because of him. He would point to the talent on the roster and argue those performers would have drawn money under any booking philosophy. Maybe he is right. But the chaos still produced enormous ratings and a cultural moment that wrestling has never quite recaptured. When Russo went to WCW, the booking became genuinely incoherent and the company collapsed. Cornette frames Russo as the single greatest villain in wrestling history. The truth is more complicated, but complicated truths do not make for good podcasts. Absolute certainty does, and Jim Cornette has never lacked for that. Number 4 is Brock Lesnar. This one is complicated because Cornette actually worked with Lesnar at Ohio Valley Wrestling during Lesnar's early WWE developmental days. He saw the raw physical gifts up close, but what he also saw was a young man who had absolutely no passion for the performance side of the job. According to Cornette, Lesnar was sullen. He was not outgoing. He was not a wrestling fan. He did not connect emotionally with anyone around him. Cornette said, "From the start, I could tell he had no personality because he was sullen. He wasn't outgoing. He wasn't a wrestling fan. He was somewhat boring and not particularly well suited to the personality side of this business." Cornette also alleged that Lesnar bullied referees and ring crew at OVW, and that he made one referee cry. The most famous story is what has come to be known as the gun incident. According to the story as Cornette has told it, Lesnar repeatedly squeezed Cornette's wife, Sin, despite repeated requests to stop. The confrontation that followed led to Cornette allegedly threatening Lesnar directly. He said, as a quote attributed to him in this story, "If he said the wrong thing to the wrong person, he ain't going to nip up after a bullet. You say foo, you to her in front of me, or I will shoot you." That quote has become legendary in wrestling circles. It should be noted, this is the story as Cornette has told it, but what it illustrates is a man willing to escalate a workplace dispute to an extreme level, something that tells you a great deal about the intensity Cornette operates at. Number 5 is Santino Marella. The former WWE Intercontinental Champion is best known for comedy work, the Cobra finisher, and being one of the more genuinely fun personalities on WWE television during his run. But backstage at Ohio Valley Wrestling, something happened that Cornette has never let go of. Marella allegedly disrespected the character of the Boogeyman in a way that Cornette found completely unacceptable. According to the story, as Cornette has told it, he saw WWE executive John Laurinaitis speaking closely with Marella, which combined with the disrespect towards the character pushed Cornette past his limit. He said, "I saw Laurinaitis with his face on his neck and I was sick of the whole fighting thing. And when he said nobody told me, I responded by saying, well, did I tell you I was going to do this? And I slapped this out of him." He also said later, "Santino for Marella, you joke, you clown. The only reason that you got a job was because you gave Laurinaitis a plausible reason to get me out of the way." Marella himself posted a public statement confirming that Cornette had slapped him multiple times at the OVW incident, with Cornette claiming 17 slaps in total. At a later fan convention in Detroit in 2017, Marella reportedly dared Cornette to slap him again. Both men were ultimately removed from the event. This is not a wrestling argument about style. This is a physical conflict over workplace behavior. And yet Cornette tells the story as though it is further evidence of the corruption and incompetence surrounding him. Every disagreement had become evidence of a conspiracy against good wrestling. Number 6 is Joey Ryan. Before we explain why Cornette hated him, it is worth knowing who Joey Ryan is. He is an indie wrestling personality whose entire act was built around a gimmick involving his own genitalia, specifically a move known as the dick flip. To most people at indie shows, it was absurdist entertainment. To Jim Cornette, it was the worst kind of mockery the business had ever produced. He was particularly furious when Ryan performed the move on Mick Foley, calling it disgraceful. Cornette viewed the entire gimmick as a calculated insult to the craft of professional wrestling. But then, in June 2020, something happened that went far beyond gimmick arguments. During the Speaking Out movement, multiple women made public allegations of sexual misconduct against Ryan, whose real name is Mike Meehan. Bar Wrestling, which Ryan owned, was shut down on the 21st of June 2020. His TNA/Impact contract was terminated the following day, the 22nd of June. Cornette responded, "Nobody closes their business if they didn't do something wrong. Nobody for Shin goes to rehab if they don't have some kind of problem that may have led to them doing something wrong." He also said, "The people that were most quick to jump in and try to score the brownie points turns out to be a f***ing pervert in real life." Imagine that. It is worth separating two things here. His original criticism of the gimmick was about wrestling philosophy. The 2020 events were about personal conduct and alleged harm to real people. Cornette bundled them together as though his distaste for the gimmick and the later allegations were part of the same story. Convenient for his narrative, not quite honest thinking. Number 7 is Joey Janela. If you want to understand what Jim Cornette truly despises, Joey Janela might actually be the clearest example on this list. Janela is the indie wrestling bad boy known for his deathmatch work, his outlaw mud show events, his reckless physical style, and his willingness to do literally anything in a ring for a reaction. To Cornette, Janela is the purest form of everything wrong with modern wrestling: untrained, reckless, attention-seeking, and utterly without regard for the principles of legitimate athletic competition. Cornette has a specific phrase he uses for deathmatch wrestling. He says it is like two dogs screwing on the side of the road. He said of Janela, "Joey Janela, somebody make a joke out of the wrestling business, come on. They're both outlawed mud show, untrained, attention-seeking play wrestlers who are mentally deficient." He also said, when Janela and another person he despises met each other, these two biggest DE in the history of the wrestling business met each other face to face, and antimatter and matter, something happened. What is genuinely interesting about Janela's response is that he owns it. He leans into it. He has publicly called himself a garbage wrestler and turned Cornette's hatred into part of his own brand. He engages with the conflict rather than ignoring it. That self-awareness is actually quite clever, but Cornette cannot see it that way, because in his world, being self-aware about being garbage is not redemption. It is just a more sophisticated version of the same crime. Number 8 is Kevin Owens. Real name Kevin Steen, WWE performer, former Universal Champion, one of the most respected workers of his generation, known for his intensity, his legitimate physical ability, and his genuinely sharp promo work. You would think Cornette might respect him. He does not. The issues between these two go back to Owens's developmental days, where Cornette reportedly had serious concerns about his attitude and work ethic. Years later, those concerns felt validated when Arn Anderson, a man with enormous credibility in the wrestling world, publicly described Owens as someone who would argue the most minute points of anything until you just wanted to tear your hair out and scream. Cornette seized on that quote like a man who had been waiting his entire life for someone else to confirm what he already knew. He said, "Golly, if only he had listened to somebody about 10 years ago say that same thing and warn them. Whoever his producers are in the WWE better have a good supply of icing headache pills and a lot of patience." Do you remember me saying that? That last line is key. Do you remember me saying that? Is the verbal equivalent of pointing at yourself and saying, "I told you so." It is not insight. It is not help. It is a man reminding everyone within earshot that he was right again about yet another person. Passionate performers argue about details. Performers who care deeply about their work push back when they disagree. That is not always a weakness. Sometimes it is the exact quality that separates someone who becomes great from someone who stays average. Cornette took Anderson's quote and used it as confirmation of a verdict he had already delivered years earlier. Being told you were right by someone else does not mean your original judgment was correct. It means two people agreed. That is a different thing. Number 9 is Orange Cassidy, and this is where the hatred becomes arguably the most extreme of the lot. Orange Cassidy is the AEW performer whose gimmick involves wrestling with his hands stuffed in his pockets, delivering what he calls sloth-style offense in a deliberately nonchalant comedic character. Cornette calls him Pockets. He views the entire character not as a clever subversion of wrestling norms, but as proof that AEW's management is using a wrestling promotion as a personal toy. He is particularly furious about what he sees as a nepotism push. suggesting the booking decisions around Cassidy reflect personal preferences rather than genuine merit. He said, Pockets has none of that. He's not a master of in-ring professional wrestling. He's not a master of psychology. He's not a human being that connects emotionally with a large number of fans. He also said, the worst pushed wrestler, most embarrassing talent in the industry is currently the guy that sticks his hands in his pockets that the billionaire's son that runs the company dressed up as on Halloween. Imagine that. The research around this subject notes that Cornette reportedly publicly wished death on Orange Cassidy. That is a significant step beyond criticism. That is not passion for wrestling. That is something else. The fact that Orange Cassidy has become genuinely popular with audiences only makes Cornette angrier, because in his view, the audience enjoying the gimmick is not evidence that it works. It is evidence of how damaged wrestling culture has become. He is essentially angry at the audience for liking what they like. And that is where his argument collapses completely. Number 10 is Sami Callihan, real name Samuel Ratch, deathmatch and Impact Wrestling veteran known for his intense, violent in-ring style and his work across Ohio Valley Wrestling, Evolve, and Impact Wrestling. The specific incident that put Callihan on Cornette's permanent list happened during a backstage segment on Impact Wrestling. Callihan swung a baseball bat at Eddie Edwards, a man Cornette describes as a personal friend, and made significant contact near his eye. Edwards sustained a real injury. The segment had been presented as a worked, choreographed piece of storytelling, but the contact was real and the damage was real. What made the situation dramatically worse, in Cornette's view, was Callihan's response to the backlash. Callihan said publicly that he was sick of this topic and that this is professional wrestling, and the fact that this is such an issue boggles my mind. To Cornette, that response was not just tone deaf. It was the clearest possible statement of an entire generation's attitude toward the safety of the people around them. He said, I just watched the clip of a guy taking a fit-ing baseball bat and needlessly bashing a friend of mine in the fit-ing eye with it. And it could and very easily could have killed him, put him in a coma or whatever because it's a baseball bat and he just swung it. He also said, I couldn't believe that there wasn't an uproar about it in the back from a standpoint of, what the fee did you think you were doing, you dumb high, rather than, oh, accidents happen. In this case, unlike some of the others, the core of the anger is understandable. His friend was hurt. Someone was reckless. The dismissal that followed was genuinely callous. But even here, Cornette used the incident to condemn an entire generation for the actions of one person. There is also something worth understanding about why the list of names matters beyond just being a collection of grudges. Each person on it represents a direction that wrestling has moved in, a choice the industry has made about what it wants to be. And Cornette has fought each of those choices loudly, publicly, and without mercy. So there they are, 10 names, 10 stories. 10 examples of Jim Cornette deciding that a person has committed an unforgivable act against the craft he loves. And when you look at the pattern, something interesting emerges. Every single person on this list did something that violated Cornette's core conviction that wrestling must feel like a real, believable, emotionally true athletic competition. Kenny Omega treated it like comedy. The Young Bucks treated it like a personal, creative playground. Vince Russo treated it like a slot machine, pulling levers for short-term sparks with no regard for long-term trust. Brock Lesnar treated it like a paycheck without passion. Santino Marella disrespected a character and used management relationships to survive the fallout. Joey Ryan turned it into a sexual comedy act. Joey Janela turned it into a backyard spectacle. Kevin Owens brought an attitude that made the people around him difficult to work with. Orange Cassidy turned the entire concept of wrestling effort into a punchline. Sami Callihan treated colleague safety like a minor inconvenience. In each case, you can see Cornette's logic. And in each case, you can also see where the logic breaks down. Because being brilliant about what wrestling used to be does not automatically make you right about what wrestling is allowed to become. Orange Cassidy's crowds feel something real when they watch him. The Young Bucks matches have made audiences genuinely care. Kenny Omega's work has produced some of the most emotionally charged matches of the modern era. None of that happened by following Cornette's rulebook. It happened by breaking it. And that is why Jim Cornette's war on modern wrestling is one of the saddest stories in the business. Not because he is wrong about the importance of storytelling and psychology. He is completely right about that. But because he became so committed to his own version of those principles that he stopped being able to see them working in forms he did not recognize. He became the man shouting at the building instead of helping design it. He became the voice that newer fans associate not with wisdom, but with anger. He became a brand built on outrage, which is exactly what Kenny Omega accused him of being in 2022. And the painful irony is that Cornette himself would hate that most of all. He does not want to be an entertainer. He wants to be right. But here is the thing that keeps people listening. Even now, even after all of it, Jim Cornette has never wavered. Not once. Not for a single moment. He has been offered opportunities to soften his positions, to walk things back, to build bridges with people he has attacked. He has refused every single time. Because underneath all the rage and the grudges and the public feuds and the restraining orders and the signed copies of legal documents sold at conventions for 8 notes apiece, there is a man who genuinely loves professional wrestling with everything he has, who believes with total sincerity that it is a legitimate art form built on the principle that 2 human beings in a ring should make you believe they are competing for something that matters. That when it is done right, it is one of the most powerful forms of live storytelling on earth. He built a career on conviction and maintained that conviction at enormous personal cost. He has burned bridges that most people in his position would have kept standing because he believed the principles behind them mattered more than the relationships. Whether you think that is brave or reckless, it is undeniably consistent. Jim Cornette has never changed his mind about what wrestling should be. And in a world where most people shift and spin and chase approval, that consistency is something real. You may not like how he says it, but you will always know what he stands for.